A 19-year-old Stanford dropout convinced the richest and most powerful people in America that a device the size of a bread box could replace every blood testing laboratory on Earth, and not one of them asked to see it work. Elizabeth Holmes raised $700 million for Theranos over 15 years. The company reached a peak valuation of $9.1 billion. Forbes put her on its cover as the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. Fortune profiled her. She spoke at conferences alongside heads of state and Nobel laureates. The device she built could reliably perform approximately 15 tests. The company told patients, investors, regulators, and pharmacy chains it could perform 240. For everything beyond those 15, Theranos employees drew the patient's blood, walked it to a back room, and ran it on machines built by Siemens. Standard commercial analyzers. The same equipment used in every hospital laboratory in the country. They reported the results as if the Edison, their proprietary device, had produced them. Patients received false positives for HIV. Patients received inaccurate cancer screenings. Patients made medical decisions based on numbers that came from machines Theranos told the world it had made obsolete. The company's board of directors included a former Secretary of State, a former Secretary of Defense, and a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. It did not include a single physician, scientist, or anyone with experience in diagnostic medicine. Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born on February 3, 1984, in Washington, D.C. Her father, Christian Holmes IV, was a vice president at Enron, a detail that would become ironic only in retrospect, but was perfectly ordinary in the late 1990s. Her mother, Noel, was a congressional committee staffer. The family had name recognition. Her great-great-grandfather was Charles Louis Fleischmann, co-founder of Fleischmann's Yeast and a one-term United States congressman. The Holmeses moved in circles where ambition was assumed and connections were inherited. Elizabeth Holmes was a striver from childhood. She told relatives she wanted to be a billionaire, not a doctor, not a scientist, a billionaire. She reportedly wrote a letter to her father at age 9 stating this directly. She enrolled at Stanford University in 2002 to study chemical engineering. Within her first year, she had filed a patent application for a wearable drug delivery patch that could adjust dosage based on biological monitoring. The patent was broad and speculative. The technology did not exist, but the filing itself was an act of positioning. She was 19 years old and building a paper trail. In March 2004, Holmes dropped out of Stanford. She used her tuition money as seed funding for a company she called Real-Time Cures, later renamed Theranos, a portmanteau of therapy and diagnosis. The pitch was simple and enormous. Blood testing is one of the most common medical procedures on Earth. It requires needles, tubes of blood, expensive laboratory equipment, and days of waiting. Holmes proposed a device that could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood, obtained by a tiny prick on the fingertip, with results available in minutes. If it worked, it would dismantle a $75 billion industry overnight. The pitch was not entirely fictional. The concept of microfluidics, manipulating tiny volumes of fluid through miniaturized channels, was real science being pursued at universities around the world. The idea that diagnostic testing could be miniaturized was plausible in the same way that the idea of a quantum computer is plausible. Eventually, probably, but not next year, and not by a single company operating in secret. The timing mattered. Holmes arrived in Silicon Valley at the exact moment the culture was most susceptible to this particular story. The genome had been sequenced. Personalized medicine was the next frontier every healthcare investor wanted to own. And the diagnostic testing industry, dominated by two giants, Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America, was a bureaucratic, slow-moving target that nobody in Silicon Valley had disrupted yet. Holmes raised her first round of funding from venture capitalists. She understood from the very beginning the dynamics of the room she was entering. Silicon Valley in 2004 was a culture that rewarded founders who spoke in absolutes. Uncertainty was weakness. Caution was lack of vision. The model was Steve Jobs. Create a reality distortion field. Attract capital. Use the capital to make the impossible real before anyone realizes how far behind you actually are. Holmes studied Jobs obsessively. She wore black turtlenecks. She built a narrative around herself that Silicon Valley was already primed to receive. The young genius dropout who saw what the establishment couldn't. She was not a scientist. She had completed 1 year of chemical engineering coursework. She had no background in biology, immunology, hematology, or clinical diagnostics. But she had something that mattered more, in the rooms where the money lived. She had a story that people wanted to believe. And the story had a personal hook. Holmes told investors and journalists that her fear of needles drove her to imagine a world without them. She told them about an uncle who died of cancer and how earlier detection might have saved him. Whether these details were true is almost beside the point. They turned a business plan into a cause. They turned an investment into a moral act. The early investors put in millions. Holmes used it to hire engineers and build prototypes. The first devices were unreliable. Results were inconsistent. The miniaturization of blood chemistry turned out to be exactly as difficult as academic researchers have been saying for decades. Fluid dynamics at microscale behave differently. Reagent volumes are too small to produce consistent reactions. And temperature fluctuations at that scale introduce error rates that are unacceptable in clinical diagnostics. By 2010, Theranos had been operating for 6 years, and the core technology still did not work. Not in a "we need a few more months" way, in a fundamental physics constrains this way. This is the moment where the story stops being about a startup that failed and becomes about something else entirely. Because instead of telling her investors the technology wasn't ready, Elizabeth Holmes doubled down. Theranos moves its operation into a 130,000 square foot building in Newark, California in 2011. The company has roughly 800 employees. The workspace is divided into zones with strict access restrictions. Engineers working on one part of the system are not permitted to see other parts. Employees sign aggressive non-disclosure agreements. Communication between teams is routed through management. Holmes controls the information flow absolutely. No one below her has a complete picture of where the technology stands. The device she calls the Edison is a small box about the size of a desktop printer. It uses proprietary cartridges called nanotainers, tiny vessels designed to hold a few drops of blood from a finger prick. The blood is supposed to flow through microfluidic channels, interact with chemical reagents, and produce diagnostic readings. Some of this works. For a handful of immunoassays and simple chemistry panels, the Edison produces results that fall within acceptable accuracy ranges, roughly 15 tests. For the other 225 tests Theranos claims it can run, the Edison either produces unreliable results or doesn't function at all. The error rates are catastrophic. Some tests show coefficient of variation numbers so high they would fail any regulatory inspection on site. So the company builds a workaround. In the back rooms of the Theranos laboratory, away from the tours and the investor visits and the press cameras, technicians take the blood samples collected from patients and run them on commercial Siemens Advia analyzers. These are standard machines. Every hospital in America has them, or something like them. The results from the Siemens machines are reported to patients and doctors as Theranos results. The lab reports carry the Theranos name. The patients believe their blood was analysed by revolutionary technology. Their doctors believe it too. This is not a pivot. It is not a temporary measure while the technology catches up. It is the core operation. This is how Theranos processes the majority of its tests for years. But even the Siemens workaround has a problem. The Edison collects blood through a finger prick, a capillary sample. Capillary blood behaves differently than venous blood drawn from an arm. It contains different concentrations of certain analytes. It is more susceptible to contamination from the squeeze required to extract it. When Theranos runs these tiny, compromised samples through machines calibrated for full venous draws, the results are unreliable, even on the commercial equipment. The company knows this. Internal emails and quality control logs show that Theranos technicians flag these discrepancies repeatedly. The flags are ignored or suppressed. In 2013, Holmes signs a deal with Walgreens to place Theranos blood testing centers inside pharmacy locations across the country, starting in Palo Alto and Phoenix. Walgreens has invested approximately $140 million in the partnership. The pitch is irresistible. Walk into your local pharmacy, get a finger prick, receive a full blood panel in hours. No doctor's visit, no needles, no waiting. Patients begin walking into Walgreens locations and getting tested. The results they receive are generated by a system that Theranos knows does not work as advertised. Patients get false positives for conditions they don't have. Patients get false negatives for conditions they do. The company's own internal quality control data shows failure rates that would shut down any certified laboratory in the country. Holmes is raising money the entire time. The investor list reads like a directory of American wealth and power. Rupert Murdoch puts in $125 million, the single largest individual investment. Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle, invests. The Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune, invests. Betsy DeVos invests. The Cox family, heirs to Cox Enterprises, invests. None of them are given access to the Edison. None of them see independent validation of the technology. None of them are shown peer-reviewed data demonstrating that the device works. They are shown Elizabeth Holmes. She speaks in a baritone voice that former employees and associates describe as deliberate and practiced. She makes sustained, unbroken eye contact. She does not blink at a normal rate. She references Steve Jobs and Thomas Edison in the same sentence, and no one in the room flinches, because the rooms she occupies are rooms where that kind of comparison is currency. The board she assembles is the single most revealing detail of the entire operation. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, James Mattis, William Perry, Sam Nunn. These are not board members selected for their understanding of blood diagnostics. They are selected because their names make the next investor feel safe. Each name on the letterhead is a signal. If these people are involved, the technology must be legitimate. Kissinger is 91 years old when he joins the Theranos board. Shultz is 92. They have no capacity to evaluate a microfluidics platform. They are not expected to. Their function is gravitational. They bend the trajectory of doubt away from the company through the sheer weight of their reputations. This is the architecture of the con. Holmes does not need the technology to work. She needs the right people to say it works. And she does not even need them to say it works. She just needs them to be associated with it. Association is endorsement. Proximity is proof. Holmes meets with heads of state. She presents at the Clinton Global Initiative. She appears on the covers of magazines. She is named to Time's list of 100 most influential people in the world. The Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, visits the Theranos laboratory and calls it the laboratory of the future. Inside that laboratory, Siemens machines are processing patient blood. The crack begins with a conversation between a young man and his grandfather. Tyler Shultz is 22 years old in 2014, a recent Stanford graduate in mechanical engineering. He works at Theranos. His grandfather is George Shultz, former Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan and one of the most prominent names on the Theranos board. Tyler sees things at the company that trouble him. He observes quality control results that show the Edison is producing inaccurate readings. He sees data being manipulated to make failing tests appear within acceptable ranges. He raises concerns internally. The concerns go nowhere. They travel up the chain of command and vanish. The culture at Theranos treats doubt as disloyalty. Employees who ask too many questions are fired. The legal team, overseen by Holmes and her boyfriend, and Chief Operating Officer Ramesh Balwani, known as Sunny, treats every departure as a potential leak and every question as a potential threat. Tyler Shultz goes to his grandfather. He tells George Shultz what he has seen. He tells him the technology does not work. He tells him patients are receiving inaccurate results. George Shultz does not believe his grandson. He believes Elizabeth Holmes. Tyler does not stop. In early 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou receives a tip about problems at Theranos. The tip leads him to former employees. It leads him to clinical data. It leads him, eventually, to Tyler Shultz. Tyler communicates with Carreyrou using a burner phone. He understands that Theranos employs a private investigation firm, David Boies' law firm, Boies, Schiller, Flexner, and that the company monitors former employees. He knows that speaking to a journalist violates his non-disclosure agreement. He does it anyway. The reporting takes months. Carreyrou interviews dozens of former employees. He reviews internal documents. He speaks with laboratory directors. The picture that emerges is comprehensive and damning. The Edison does not work. The company uses commercial machines. Patients are receiving unreliable results. And the company's leadership knows all of this. Before the story publishes, Holmes learns it is coming. She calls Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal. He has $125 million invested in Theranos. Holmes asks him to kill the story. Murdoch refuses. He tells Holmes he will not interfere with the newsroom. The story runs. On October 15, 2015, John Carreyrou publishes a front-page investigation in the Wall Street Journal, headlined with a simple claim. Theranos' proprietary technology handles a small fraction of the tests it offers, and the rest are processed on conventional machines from other manufacturers. Holmes responds immediately. She goes on television. She tells Jim Cramer on CNBC that the story is inaccurate. She tells reporters the journal relied on disgruntled former employees. She deploys the board, Kissinger, Mattis, Shultz, as character witnesses. It does not work. Because the story is not based on opinion. It is based on data. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services sends inspectors to the Theranos laboratory in Newark. What they find confirms every detail Carreyrou reported and surfaces problems even worse. The inspection reveals that Theranos' proficiency testing, the mandatory check that proves a laboratory's results are accurate, contains failures so severe that they pose immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. This is the regulatory designation for someone could die. While the federal inspection proceeds, the Shultz family stages its own confrontation. George Shultz invites Tyler to his home in Palo Alto. When Tyler arrives, Theranos lawyers are waiting in the house. They ambush him, they present legal documents, they pressure him to recant his statements, to sign new agreements, to stop cooperating with the press. Tyler Shultz, 23 years old, sitting in his 94-year-old grandfather's living room, surrounded by lawyers, representing a company his grandfather still believes in, refuses. He does not sign anything. He walks out. Tyler Shultz would later spend more than $400,000 in legal fees defending himself against Theranos. His parents helped cover the costs. The company hired private investigators to follow him. They tracked his movements and monitored his communications. A 23-year-old graduate was being surveilled by a $9 billion company because he told the truth about a blood testing machine. George Shultz would later issue a public statement praising his grandson's integrity. But in that living room, in that moment, he sided with Holmes. The fall is not sudden. It is institutional, methodical, and complete. In January 2016, CMS issues its findings. The Theranos laboratory in Newark has failed its inspection in a manner that qualifies as immediate jeopardy. The agency revokes the lab's CLIA certificate, the federal license required to conduct clinical testing. CMS bans Elizabeth Holmes from owning or operating any laboratory for a period of 2 years. Theranos voids 2 years of Edison test results, approximately 1 million tests sent to patients and doctors that the company now admits may have been inaccurate. 1 million tests, 1 million medical decisions potentially based on false data. Patients who were told they had conditions they didn't have, patients who were told they were healthy when they weren't. Walgreens terminates its partnership and sues Theranos for $140 million. They eventually settle for less than $30 million, a fraction of what they invested. In March 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charges Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani with massive fraud. The SEC complaint describes a scheme in which Holmes raised hundreds of millions of dollars through false statements about the technology, the company's revenue, and the number of tests the Edison could perform. Holmes settles with the SEC without admitting or denying the findings. She pays a $500,000 penalty, less than 1/10% of the money she raised. She returns 18.9 million shares of Theranos stock, which are now worthless. She is barred from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years. The company dissolves. Theranos formally ceases operations in September 2018. Its remaining assets are distributed to creditors. Employees who had received stock options as a major component of their compensation discover those options are worth zero. Some had taken below-market salaries for years, betting on the company's future. The criminal case follows. In June 2018, a federal grand jury in the Northern District of California indicts Holmes and Balwani on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. 11 counts total. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes begins on September 8, 2021. It lasts nearly 4 months. The prosecution presents testimony from patients who received false results. It presents testimony from investors who were shown fabricated revenue projections. It presents testimony from former employees who describe a company that knew its technology didn't work and chose to use it on patients anyway. Holmes takes the stand in her own defense. She testifies for 7 days. She tells the jury she believed the technology worked. She tells them she was misled by her own scientists. She tells them Sunny Balwani controlled many of the operational decisions. She also testifies that Balwani was abusive toward her throughout their relationship, that he controlled her schedule, her diet, her sleep, her friendships, that she was a victim of his influence. The jury deliberates for 7 days. On January 3, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes is found guilty on 4 of 11 counts. 3 counts of wire fraud against investors, 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors. She is acquitted on 4 counts relating to defrauding patients. The jury deadlocks on 3 remaining counts. On November 18, 2022, Judge Edward Davila sentences Elizabeth Holmes to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Sunny Balwani, tried separately, is convicted on all 12 counts he faces, fraud against both investors and patients. He is sentenced to nearly 13 years. Holmes reported to a minimum security federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas, on May 30, 2023. She was 39 years old. She had given birth to 2 children during the period between conviction and sentencing. Rupert Murdoch lost $125 million. He never recovered a cent. The Walton family, the DeVos family, Larry Ellison, none of them got their money back. The Edison sits in a storage facility somewhere, a breadbox-sized machine that was supposed to change medicine. It could run 15 tests, not 240, not even close. The rest was a story told in black turtlenecks in rooms where no one asked for proof, because the person telling it had made sure the most powerful names in the country were